this is, what I entered the project seeing. So this was our wonderful character lineup. You're not seeing the creatures up here, but this is the main cast. And we divided this lineup here between ourselves. So in Portland, we were doing a lot of the sort of secondary characters. McKinnon and Saunders are the best in the world at head mechanics. So head mechanics is where the animator has sort of ultimate control over the puppet. We actually had a meeting, a sort of a brainstorm meeting with Guillermo, really early days of how does Guillermo want these characters and Mark to perform? And we felt that mechanical animation over replacement animation was best suited for the emotions that we wanted to get from.
And these are the actual puppets from the film. These are not maquettes or cast, they are the actual puppets.
These are the real things. So basically all of the human characters we decided to do with mechanical animation, and McKinnon and Saunders did them. And then Pinocchio, because he's a wooden boy and he didn't really lend himself to having a rubber skin over head mechanics, we made him as a replacement. So if we go to the next slide, again, so early days, once we've got the lineup, a lot of the early work we do is reference sourcing, and we do these sort of costume research boards on each character, trying to find the historically correct reference to add to the designs and to sort of give back to the designers. And then for our fabrication team, this here is an early sort of paint reference board. How are we going to paint the skins of the puppets? What are our characters going to look like? What is the style, the paint, sort of brush stroke? And, early days we found that Andrew Wyeth's work and Norman Rockwell's paintings were very sort of like, they had the texture and the detail that Guillermo really liked in flesh tones. So this was our style guide of how we would paint the flesh as we made the puppets. Go to the next one. So first, the first step for the puppet team is to take that two-dimensional artwork and turn it into a three-dimensional character. So in England, they were sculpting maquettes of Pinocchio. And on the left here, this is the original maquette that Guillermo and Mark saw for the first time. This is our wooden boy. And as you can see, this becomes a style guide, it becomes a scale guide, it's everything to us to sort of start off the process of making a fully mechanical animated puppet. But this is when we first see him. We go to the next.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When did we decide to not have Pinocchio's nose so pointy?
Well, yeah.
Well, on the beginning we started, you remember, it was more like almost like a pumpkin head.
Yeah.
And I think it was decided during the process with Guy.
Yeah, okay.
Guy Davis, when he came and redesigned.
Because this one looks slightly wrong to me, because it has a very sort of pointy.
And it was the first maquette.
And the other decision was to make it slightly up. It's not completely like a pine cone, like a pine, but a little up.
Yeah.
But I think Guy Davis, who was instrumental in translating Pinocchio from a 2D drawing to sort of an intermediate stage, he had to move those elements very carefully because it's like an emoji. It's two eyes on one line, and if you move them ever so slightly, the expression changes completely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. If we go to the next. So over in Portland, we were doing the same process of maquette sculpting with the creatures. And this is an amazing sculptor, Toby Froud, who was our main sort of hero sculptor at Shadow Machine. He is from a very famous family of puppet designers and makers. So his
Brian Froud,
who
designed Labyrinth and Dark Crystal.
Yeah. And
Toby, who sculpted this sculpture, is the baby in Labyrinth. The baby that David Bowie steals.
Yeah, a big claim to fame. So we go to the next. So one of the sort of I think the most exciting part of a puppet build is taking that maquette, getting into a room full of the artists, the craftspeople, the head of animation, the director, and really like figuring out what do you need from this puppet? Because we've got this static model and we've got to turn it into a fully animatable puppet. So we ask, the directors what they need from it. Brian's there. We do all these sketches of like breakdowns of how do we think, what materials are going to go into it. So when we're making a puppet, we use silicons, foam latex. It's amazing. Fabrics over the top. So this is one of our meetings up in Portland, and this is one of my early sort of material sketches and ideas of how we were going to make one of our fairground characters.
Look how young you look.
Yes.
That was a long time ago.
One interesting thing is this guy was the antagonist of the film until really, really late in pre-production. And then we decided to go with Volpe, who was sort of coalescing all the characteristics, but was a much more interesting puppet.
Yeah.
And a more interesting character to have Christoph Waltz voice.
I remember Guillermo calling me up and went, "George, what do you think? Are we too far along with Mangiafoco?"
You sound a lot more preoccupied than I was. I was like, yeah, we're changing it.
Let's go to the next. So the difference, so a lot of our characters are hand sculpted in clay, which we then mold and we create the silicon faces from the molds. But with Pinocchio, because we wanted him to be 3D printed replacement faces, he was actually taken from the maquette and modeled into the computer. So the whole of his puppet sculpt was done in a computer, which you're seeing here. If we go to the next one. Once we've got all of the sort of the hero parts, all of the elements, you know, we figured out how many parts a body has to be broken down into so that we can then rebuild it into a fully action puppet. One of the things with puppets, we also have to plan for making multiple puppets. So we made 32 Pinocchios, we made, you know, multiples of Geppetto and the other characters. So we have to mold every individual part. And, you know, the joy of having Guillermo directing Pinocchio is that Guillermo, many years ago, was a mold maker himself. And, you know, my mold-making team are the unsung heroes. Nobody really is interested in molds, except for Guillermo. He would come to the studio, and he'd go straight to the mold-making department. And it was so fantastic to see those guys get the recognition, and because they work so hard. If they don't do a good mold, you see a big seam line on a puppet's face. So that's why I call them the unsung heroes.
Yeah.
So on Pinocchio, you said you did you 3D printed the interchangeable heads for all the phonons, right?
Yes.
Oh, right.
Yep.
But the body, you 3D printed that as well. But
Yeah,
then
we
how'd you
did.
get the armature inside the?
Yep, so, and you'll see some photographs of that as well. So as we go through, Pinocchio himself, because he's such a small, in fact, if we go to the next one, I think we've got, here we go. Yeah, so here's Pinocchio's body, and you can see, so the back shell of his body is 3D metal printed, and then everything was soldered and screwed and bolted into that. And that was basically made like that to be the spine of the character, to keep the strength of the puppet. And then we actually just painted all of the 3D metal printed material and the plastic material.
So here's what I was thinking when I was watching the film. Since you're swapping the heads and there's such specific paint job on the heads, how did you get it not to boil or change?
We use a color printer, and that was an early decision we had. We talked about doing them by hand.
They did boil.
But to keep the wood grain,
digital.
But even so, there's some inconsistency.
Right.
You just can't print that perfectly.
So, but you have. So, I guess you would do a little color pass in digital to help.
Yeah.
Yeah, that, and also we decided early on, Mark, one of his masterpieces was to direct animation in Fantastic Mr. Fox. Mm-hmm. And we decided that we would allow what they named the Phantom Wind, or what do you call it?
Mystery Wind.
The mystery
when the
wind.
fur- for when the
Phantom
fur is
Wind was a
bubbling, yeah.
different thing. Mystery Wind. And so there's boiling on the fur or on the color. We allow it
I saw,
sometimes.
if I'm not mistaken, some of the digital simulations, like the fire on the water, looks
Have
like
that.
you applied that so that
Yeah.
it didn't stand out. Yeah.
Yeah, we applied it to the digital. Yeah.
yeah.
And we did with Pinocchio's face. We did one. Sometimes we cleaned up the flicker on the faces, but sometimes we let them be. You know, like we didn't clean, and sometimes we just cleaned half of it up so it didn't stand out, so it didn't become too clean. So there's
you worked
always
on-
a little bit of. Like,
You worked on
flicker.
Kubo, right? Is that?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
So Kubo was interesting because it was a similar approach, but a lot of tiny, small, different decisions that led to a different aesthetic. Because
Yeah.
Kubo had a very smooth look
Yeah.
in the
Absolutely.
CG effects, which was very effective for that film. It was a gorgeous film.
Yeah.
But here, I found myself, especially as I knew I was going to moderate this, and I watched it again, I'm like, I was like looking at the fire effect. I was looking at some of the water sims. The water sims seem to almost be on twos.
We did
Right?
deliberately strive for something
It's
that's
very
not
clever.
too-
Yeah.
How about the bile? And this now it's getting really in the weeds. The water sims on the bile inside the dogfish's stomach. Was that CG or was any of that done?
No, we gave it, we art directed it to feel like gelatin,
Yes.
like a material that you could use
For stop
or-
motion,
For stop
or
motion.
cellophane, yeah.
But
Yeah.
the same way that, for example, the surface of the water feels like a film.
Yes.
But behaves like water.
Yes.
Because the trick is when you're dealing with elements, real elements, if you go with like explosions, clouds, you have to direct them with a certain latitude. Like not all our skies are the same. Some skies look like cotton, sometimes look more painterly, and it has to be of a piece. And sometimes we decided backgrounds.
Yeah, and we also did tests with elements like fire and smoke where we physically created it. We knew we couldn't do it for the whole film, it just wouldn't be practical.
Right.
So we would create that and we would say, this is what
Match that.
looks like in our
So,
world.
so when there's the explosion on the first in the church, the fires looks very analog.
Yeah.
Is that was that done in CG or was that
yeah,
done?
but it was done to match.
In my slides, I got
Okay,
pictures and stuff for that. So
very
you can see that.
I'll quickly
I'll get to my
finish up.
questions
So,
later.
George is taking so long. As always.
I'm going to be fast. So we talked a little bit about the skeleton. All of our characters, all of our sort of human characters have skeletons as well. So it was just Pinocchio that we used 3D metal printing. This is what most of our skeletons in our human characters look like. They're made up of ball and socket joints so that the animators can articulate the puppet and hold them frame by frame. If you go through...
And they have to be really robust.
They
because
do.
These characters, we animated for almost 1,000 days, and we just put these characters through hell.
Yeah, we're really precious about making our puppets down to the last little button that we stitch on them, and then we give them to the animators, and they kick them around the stages for a few years.
They
It's
destroy
amazing.
them. They destroy them. Like in the shot where Spazzatura the monkey enters the carnival, the animator destroyed 3 puppets on that shot alone.
Really?
Yeah.
Because of the materials?
The puppets are like the Treasury Department, and the animators are like Donald Trump. They just absolutely. And there is a puppet hospital.
Yeah, we have a puppet
Well, what's so
hospital.
great about Pinocchio is usually these things don't last. You know, you see collectors like Peter Jackson has the old,
Yeah.
but they just degrade because the materials are terrible, but the Pinocchios will last,
It
right?
will last. And I think those early puppets were mostly made in foam latex, which is a natural product and does disintegrate over time.
It keeps curating over the years.
Yeah.
So it becomes powder.
Yeah. No, we're like mad scientists using all these.
Now there
different
is,
ways.
it's worth mentioning, is it still at the Museum of Modern Art, your
Yes,
installation?
if you guys go to New York, there's an installation about Pinocchio in 2 galleries called The Art of Pinocchio, and it's going to be there until April. In only 2 months, we've had about 200,000 people go through the
And
exhibit.
what's good about it, I mean, or what something to take note of if you're in New York, is this is not like it gets packed up and then they could do it again. These things literally disappear. They disintegrate. So this is a moment in time when, if you have an opportunity to see this,
Yes.
I will, because I'm sure Guillermo's going to buy another house just to put all of this stuff in. So I'll get to see
I am
it
looking.
myself. But if you want to see it, yeah. But and also, I don't know if you got to see, had an opportunity to see Guillermo's touring Bleak House installation. But not only is he have a beautiful eye for curation, he really works well with the and the whole team. I watched some behind-the-scenes stuff on it with Adam. Just look on YouTube too. Adam Savage does a little tour of it. It's really fascinating, but also the way it's being displayed is beautiful. So it's definitely a good thing. Also, if you got young people, what a great way to introduce them to museums, because here it is, beautiful stuff.
How many of you want to do stop motion here, if at all? There you go. That's exactly. And part of the decision. Look, stop motion. animators are weirdos. We're all weirdos. But out of those weirdos, the weirdest ones are in stop motion. Sorry, you swanky, swarthy. We are really strange people that maintain an art form that is impossible. And studios don't like stop motion. It's too slow, too expensive.
Can't give notes.
Can't
give notes.
No, you know what I did with this movie, and I spoke to the crew on the first day, and I said, we will never preview this movie, nor we will get a single note from the studios. And everything we do will be protected as a work of art. Give us your 100%. And I was able to protect everyone. Not a single note.
And how long ago did you first show me the test footage? It must have been a while ago.
A while ago. I mean, this movie has been, we started thinking about it and putting it together in 2004 or 5. And we were fully rejected by everyone around 2009. And from then on, right? Yeah. We interrupted George.
You had shown me that it still had it didn't have the rod removal yet.
No, we were doing tests. We did, Brian did a lot of tests that I'm sure he has footage.
I think we should really quickly get through the puppets and then we'll get to Brian.
I like it.
This is an amazing photograph because this is the head mechanic that's inside Geppetto.
That's
so
Geppetto.
This is what is sitting underneath the skin.
It's like Terminator 2 for the elderly.
And the animator literally will hand manipulate each of those paddles to get the mouth shapes. So as he's animating, it's just frame by frame moving those little
Now, Georgina, was that Guillermo was explaining to me that there were little like screws that
Allen
would
keys.
turn and lift and move those so you'd actually deform the skin.
Yeah, with Geppetto through the top of his head, and that would lower his jaw. Let's go to the next slide. This is actually, and we'll play it, this is a test. So when we do the head mechanics, we'll put a silicone skin on and we'll quickly get it out to an animator and do a test of it. This was the ship's captain that, you know, certain sculpts lend themselves to mechanics. And we put this skin on a very simple head mechanic and look at how much expression he gets.
Oh,
really
sorry.
good. Oh, no, that's fine, Brian. Yeah. So,
The dogfish.
Shut up.
So the next image, of course, then Pinocchio. You know, we've talked a little bit about Pinocchio. So because it's 3D printed, we had to go through sort of more of a classic animation sort of process. So we had Guy sketched a lot of these mouth shapes, the key shapes out. Then we had an animator, Kim Slate, a digital animator, who went in and drew all of these faces out to sort of get the mouth shapes, get the expressions in 2D.
And these shapes are not what we ended up with. They are sort of, we tried out a lot of different things. We actually spent an enormous amount of time of designing Pinocchio's face and how his mouth.
These three or four elements.
We did an enormous amount.
Yeah.
You may notice the Frankenstein scar.
Kill me? But why would he want to do that?
Yeah, so that's a bit of DreamWorks angled mouth, but that didn't work for him, so we left that behind.
Yeah. So then this next one just shows you a still image of sort of the process of breaking that head down. So rather than us making head mechanics, we still have to allow the faces to connect to the face, to the head, and the eyes to be separate and the nose to be separate. So this was all happening in the computer while our sculptors were doing it practically with the other characters. And here we go. Here's a tray of faces, a pizza box of faces. We use pizza boxes to carry our faces around in. And what you're seeing on the left here is the digital sort of matte painting that wraps around. That is the paint job for Pinocchio's face that would wrap around the digital model each time we printed it. And here was our sort of first real test, wasn't it?
It's the very first.
Where? I want to see it.
This was the first time we saw our little wooden boy actually speak.
Where? I want to see it.
Yeah, that was an exciting.
He's very cute.
Where? I want to see it.
And then let's go on. We'll run through these. All of our bodies are cast in silicon, so the armatures are laid into the mold and cast around. We'll go to the next. Same with the head skins. We have a whole team of people removing seams after we've cast them. And then we've got a team of costume makers. So they've done all the research, and once they've got the bodies, they then have to pattern cut all of the parts. These are actually the patterns for all of the Black Rabbit's coats. This is one of our costume makers on site stitching our puppets into their costumes. It's not like putting a pair of trousers on. You literally have to stitch them, and tiny, tiny stitches so that you don't read it on the screen.
And for example, if one of the things we talked with Georgina, Mark and I went and said, can the podesta remove his hat? Because obviously it's a different sculpture and a different thing. And if you guys work in stop motion in the future, just understand that you will be paid to play with toys the rest of your life. The best perks in the world.
It's great. I played with dolls growing up, and I'm still playing with dolls. It's fantastic. So the next slide. We then have this amazing team of painters, and the painters, they establish the look of the film at the beginning, and then they literally hand paint every part of the puppet. So this is in England with the Pinocchio puppets. The next, this is, you know, we put wear and age into the costumes with paint and with dye and with bleach. We even use sandpaper on some of the costumes. We'll go to the next. And then when all of this is done, the puppets go out to set, and within about a week, they're usually broken. So we have what's called an ER, a puppet hospital, and this is Shannon, one of our hospital, mending one of our puppets on set and mending it in the studio. So, you know, how do you cram talking about making a puppet into 10 minutes? I failed terribly. I think I've got about half an hour.
I interrupted you.
But I worked with probably the most talented puppet makers in the world, and everybody brings something to the table with, you know, with Mark and Guillermo's leadership and vision of how the movie was going to go, and Brian's like constantly being there to tell us what he needs from an animation standpoint. Over to you, Brian.
Thank you. Yeah, but let's go on to the next set of slides.
This is flowing so seamlessly. Quite the technology.
I can see why you're all drawn to stop motion.
Yeah, the digital world.
Oh, there we go. So
These are all puppets.
Yeah, they're all puppets. You won't believe it. No, this is the animation team. And there was about 40 of them at one time, and because of the pandemic, there was like, we had sort of 60 stop-motion animators going through the studio, plus the people in Guadalajara animating down there.
Can I ask a question about
that?
That head's actually, wasn't that the scale that you used to animate with Sebastian?
The cricket, we couldn't make a tiny cricket, because then you can't animate him. So we made a cricket in the same size as the other puppets, but then because he had such much interaction with Pinocchio as he's lying dead on the
table,
on the work table, we decided to build a big Pinocchio. So we only built the head and the torso and the top of his arm. But we sort of had to do that because there was so much interaction.
Yeah.
So
it's based on the size of Guillermo's door, so we can get it into his
Not fun.
All the creatures were as well.
And then I got this slide here, which is a funny slide. It explains a little bit about how I sort of like would thinking about the animation that needed to fit into this film. So it's not quite real world. So it's more like this a simpler version of the real world, and that goes into the animation as well. If I can get to go forward, I can't. Oh, there we go. Oh. There. And also, like, we have these pants, which everybody loves. Mark, do you want to say something about these pants?
I love these pants. No, we found this piece of fabric, and it became sort of a touchstone for us, because we were looking for like, well, how perfect is this world? How imperfect is it? And these stripes seem to capture something. Everybody goes, yeah, that's it. And so we always kept coming back to that. So it's not a perfect world, but it's also not a world that's distorted and crazy. We don't have, you know, in our production design, we didn't wind up having buildings that were all, you know, kind of wonky. We chose not to do that for very good reasons, which Guillermo will get into in great detail, I'm sure, later.
Yeah. After a drink or two.
Yeah.
So these like fantastically detailed worlds were created. So the animation needed to be, you know, quite realistic and detailed as well. But I still was like wanted to make it stop motion. So we shot most of the films on 2s. And this is the very first animation test I have on the film. And sort of really to prove to myself that 2s would be all right. Because it's a bit nerve-wracking suggesting that and then like making a 2-hour film.
Do you understand what it means to shoot in 2s? Raise your hand if you do. Oh,
Okay,
all right.
yeah.
Raise your hand if you don't. All right.
All right, very good. Thank you. So in film, all films like Top Gun and Avatar, there is 24 frames.
Actually, not Avatar.
No.
Is Avatar
No.
It's not enough for
It's high
Avatar.
frequency.
Bad
All
example.
right, okay, so
They
forget Avatar.
got some more in there.
Forget Avatar. The Hobbit.
Forget Avatar.
No, not The Hobbit.
Any film apart from Avatar, there is like 40 frames that's rolling in front of the light in a speed that your eyes perceive it as motion. You can choose to take all those 24 frames and it would be working, but you could also choose not to take them all, but only take half of them. So you only got 12 different frames in the second. So you got 2 of each next to each other. And the eye, it's just sort of just on the limit of what you can cheat your brain to think that this is actually moving. I don't know. Is that a good?
Yeah, but if you shoot in ones means you're going to move it very little. You're going to shoot 1 frame. You're going to do that 24 times, and the movement will be very smooth, but not necessarily expressive.
No.
When you do 2s, it's not necessarily smooth, but it
So
can be very
when you're
expressive.
if you're doing every single frame, then there's a tendency of the motion to be very soft and light and can be easier, very floaty. If you're doing it on 2s, then it's sort of there's more gravity to your puppet. It's easier not to be trapped into everything just floating around and moving at all times. So it gives it a stop motion look, which was, I think, very important to all of us, that we will keep that look.
Also, you know, with an animator, well, just to give you some context, an animator will generate from 1 to 3 seconds of animation in a week. So the difference between shooting on 1s and 2s is it's not double, but it's pretty close to it.
Yeah.
But we did ultimately shoot, I would say, at least a third of this film, probably, on
maybe,
1s. And we had to do that because we had a lot of camera move, thank you, Guillermo. And when you move the camera, and it's moving on 1s, because the camera is programmed to move for 1 frame at a time, you have to move the puppet as well most of the time. Otherwise, you get a stuttering. So we had to do some of it on 1s for sure.
And then we just kept on, because in the beginning there was nothing, you know. So you start with like very little, a very simple test, and I got my hands on an unpainted hammer and a chisel there. Actually, Oliver did. And then tested out like different kinds of. You have to sort of figure out how to do everything. Oh, now we got it.
It's back.
Oh.
Yeah, we get it again. So we need to figure out how does the wood work? Can we actually do this? And it turns out we can. So great. and
And this goes back to that notion again of trying to do things in front of the camera if we can. It felt right for the aesthetic of the film. It is a stop motion film. We want you to feel it. When you look at these things, we want the objects to feel like they're there and they're tangible.
But it's beautiful to understand that one of the reasons stop motion is unique is that it feels handmade. It feels like it's like a hand-carved movie. And these tests are beautiful to see because every single time in the hundreds of actions that the characters do, material has to be tested that behaves like a bread, but this size. That behaves like wood, but this size. So Brian, who is definitely, like if he was in Scientology, he would be in level 9. He believes in Xenu, the Xenu of stop motion. And Brian is a zealot. And he said everything, even if we have ultimately permutations in which it's digital, has to look of a piece with animation.
And
He came out of his volcano and said,
Yes.
This is one of my favorite tests because that speaks to some of the things that Guillermo just talked about, the size of things. Because this bread is like this big, but it needs to feel to the audience as being like, you know, a full-size bread. And I think we're succeeding there. And here's more tests. Now I'm just running through them because they're sort of like all just the same thing. We test out all the different props. Here's an interesting one. Oh, yeah. This is also some of the very first thing. This is probably a little bit too far towards stop motion. So pulling back from that, because like it became a little bit too sort of desktop in your bedroom kind of thing, where I'm using. I'm using which we ended up doing in the film as well. But these are sort of a little bit simpler than what we ended up doing. So. Because you're taking one frame.
A motion blur axe?
Motion blur axe,
Yeah.
It's a piece that simulates.
So here we
a
go.
blur.
This one didn't have any, but like, and you could do all kinds of trickery with it. So here we come into one that's got a really fun blur on.
There.
Yeah.
it's actually a point of pride with animators to see how much they can get away with for
Without-
one frame.
Yeah.
They'll just put all kinds of crazy stuff in there.
Yeah.
But if it works,
Sure.
Yeah.
See,
But
there's
I
another
think
thing.
it's beautiful for you to see it because people assume computer on any animation.
Right.
And it's beautiful to see this, the analog solution.
And there's the bits I used, you know. So it's just like bits of hot glue.
Very high tech.
Yeah.
And that is Brian's entire salary right there.
before taxes.
Before taxes.
Again, more sort of. I want to show you.
If this is starting to feel like a vacation video, please let us know. And this is also the Grand Canyon.
Well, this is wonderful.
This
It's
is
like
all we
making
talk
the film
about,
again.
by the way.
So again, I was obsessed about keeping as much of the material in stop motion. So that one was like literally oil paint with a lot of linseed oil in, so it never really dried off. So we could control it that way. This is plasticine. There's like every frame with the hair dryers in there to make it look shiny.
Thank you, Geppetto.
This is just beautiful. Water running on the window, we did ourselves because it sort of lends itself to stop motion in a funny way.
As an element that you comp in, or
Yeah.
We shot the puppets and then afterwards we shot the window. Again, we gave the rein to the digital team at Mr. X, but because Cricket, this is a shot with Cricket in, he was so big, so the raindrops also became big, so we could keep it on the floor, which I thought was immensely exciting.
That is our life. Life in the fast lane.
And here we come.
Making movies.
Here we look at that fire we were talking about before, and this is a fireplace, and it's like
with cotton?
It's about this big. Oh.
Is that cotton or?
That's cotton. That's like a cheesecloth with
yeah.
beeswax in. And this is another piece of, this is, wow. Can I get it to play?
If
Yeah,
this
there we
isn't
go.
interesting to you, do not pick a career in movies. Because this is what we talk about all day.
By the way, I recommend you
All day.
never take a long car trip with Brian. Only things under 30 minutes.
Oh, here's another one of my absolute favorites. They're all my favorites. Here we go. There's the, we go back to the sand one again, because that is just delightful.
No After Effects, huh?
Look at that. That's just pushing sand around.
Real sand.
It's great. And the muzzle flash of the guns. Absolute first animation done with Pinocchio.
Yeah, that's great. And can you walk? Can you walk for me? Yeah, can you walk around in a circle?
And it sort of brings me on to the next thing I'm going to talk about, is bringing characters into the characters. And Pinocchio is such a fantastic puppet, because he sort of lies in himself. You could really do nothing to him, and he's there. You feel his spirit is there. And then we carry on, like,
That's
experimenting with his motion.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
James Cagney.
Oh, did you copy? Yeah.
The
Yeah,
Armstrong puppet.
it's literally a copy of. And we carry on. Then, like, the puppets, it's a long process of building the puppets. So they come out of the puppet shop sort of bit by bit.
Yeah.
So as
One
soon as we
every-
get a puppet, we test it and figure out how they move. And by doing that, we sort of learn about the style of the movie. We also, I have lots of tests that's not great. You're not going to see those. But we then pick the ones that are great, and then we point, every time there's a brief of a animator, we point towards.
Do you cast different animators for different roles,
Yeah.
like in traditional 2D?
Yeah. Yeah, this is not normally done in stop motion. We'll talk about it, but we decided, Mark and I made some decisions about how we did this and other things in animation different than anyone normally
That's like the
does.
old Disney style,
Yeah.
where you would different. So if you see different characters in the old 2D and even some of the 3D work,
Yeah, Andreas Deja.
they'll have animators that follow the characters around, as opposed to you do this scene, you do this scene, you do this scene. And because so much of the personality of the animator comes through, sometimes it's when they're drawing, it's the facial expressions, they're copying themselves. Sometimes it's based on a family member. So to have the consistency, because there's so much character in this film, of just the way, there's just the body language. So the same people animated each character throughout the process?
Generally, we tried to do that, and we did it with the scenes too.
Yeah.
We had the bedroom scene between Geppetto and Carlo, and then Geppetto and Pinocchio, and one animator, Tucker, went into that little bedroom, which was probably, the bedroom set was not even 4 feet square, and he spent 2 years in the dark with nothing but Cheetos and Diet Coke
And faith.
and animated that he did the whole scene himself. And we tried to do that with a number of animators. You can't do it all the way through, it's impossible. But it was a really great way of making sure that the animators felt ownership of this stuff. Because we wanted them to look at it and go, yep, I did that. And way better work on it.
And some of them were great for Pinocchio melancholic, or Pinocchio happy, or Pinocchio dancing, and you try to do that. Stop motion is so brutal that sometimes one animator does one shot and then the over is another animator. So this was really giving them cohesiveness and less efficient, but more beautiful artistically.
It's even more brutal than that, in that you will do a shot of a character and then you'll shoot the over
2 years later.
A year and a half later, literally.
Because this is when the set becomes available, or one of the 30 Pinocchios becomes available, or one of the 20 Geppettos.
And Mark, sorry to interrupt in the middle, but when you started off, because I'm guessing you're shooting on 5Ds or something like that, or stuff. So when you started off, there was video assist of some kind, but it was never this level where you could
No,
actually.
when I started
go
off,
back.
there was not video assist.
It wasn't even that.
It was
It
old
was literally like a shutter, and you had to wait for
Mitchells.
dailies.
We shot on old 35 millimeter Mitchell cameras.
Mitchell and
we did surface gauges a lot.
Right.
You know, just these little pointers that you come in and
Harryhausen
stick.
style,
track.
yeah.
And then the next step forward was, okay, we could set up a video camera and we'd have a screen.
Right.
But we had no way of recording it one frame at a time. So we would trace on the screen.
Right.
And then, so that was the next thing. And then we got a technology where we could record 3 frames, and we thought the world had just given us the best gift ever.
Yeah.
Because you could actually see 3 frames connected to one another. And then it went, you know, further than that. And now, of course, you could just...
What's amazing when you look back at like the old Harryhausen stuff, or like the Medusa head with all the snakes, and he had to somehow remember which direction
All
each
in his-
snake
all
was
in his
moving.
head.
Or the Jason the Argonauts with all the skeletons. And now you're getting you're getting the photo, you're getting what's the final pixel image. So it's got to help for when you got to go back and shoot the
But
over.
there's
year
a
later.
famous story of Ray animating the Hydra, and in the middle of the heads moving, he got a phone call. He answered, and when he came back, he didn't remember anything. He had to start over. Yeah. By the way, Brian is available for bar mitzvahs and parties with the show. Please continue.
I am Count Volpe, you have been chosen. Come partake in the fun, fanciful, carefree carnival life.
And then
Yeah,
also,
do you want to explain the mirrors to them?
Yeah, okay, yeah.
It's important.
So the mirror,
I
so
am
you can see
Count
there that we got mirrors on either side. That's sort of to save time, because as you're animating from the front, you want to see what's going on the side of the face as well, because if some silicone are bouncing up or like making ugly shadows and stuff, you want to be aware of that before he's suddenly on stage and shooting real shots.
And these tests are really important for us as the puppet team, because we'll have made the first one-off puppet and we'll give them to animation to test. We'll show them to the directors, and if everybody's happy, then we go into mass production of making more of the puppets. We can make jigs to duplicate them. So this is like the first time we see these characters moving and, you know, articulating.
And then testing the puppets with the props they're going to handle as well is an important thing to do. So you're sure they're the right height and they can actually reach. And then I'm coming to the end of this. So
The less said about this, the better. Let's just move on.
So the animators, quite often they would do a little live action video of the action that they were going to animate. And then we use that as a tool as well to show Mark and Guillermo to give, is a really great way to sort of jumpstart the whole process, because you get you got something you could point towards and go like, yeah, more like that, let's like that.
You start with storyboard, then comes this, then Mark and I would launch the shot formally after that and give punctual instructions. And then finally we would say to the animators, if you feel like doing something different during the shot, or the puppet suggests something different, follow the puppet. Ignore an instruction. Because we said part of the thing that you get in live action is from action to cut, the actor is in charge of the shot. And we said, let's give that same control to the animators. And a lot of them came up with little improvs that were very fruitful.
Yeah, I think they were sort of very helpful. I would think that most time when you guys saw these things that the animators have come up with, you would be like, oh yeah, great, just like that.
Yeah.
You know?
Especially with the perfect Geppettos.
Yeah.
Or your nose will grow and grow up to here.
This is being used in a legal case right now. Please, we cannot comment anymore. HR.
Yeah.
More it grows.
And you can see it's not it's not all of it copied precisely over, but the animator would use the best parts of it and just make animation. Because if you just did like
That was footage from Cocaine Bear too.
Yay!
Yeah.
Before we move off of this part of the conversation, a few of you worked on Mars Attacks, yes? So you did?
Yeah,
Georgina
I did,
right.
yeah. Many years ago.
So it's interesting, for us stop motion fans, that was an interesting moment in the history of film because now I only know as a an audience member, but my understanding was that was originally planned to be stop motion, and then it ended up, because when CG started taking root, there was definitely, the studios gravitated towards using digital whenever they could because, first of all, you could give notes, you could change things, you could go back, cheaper, easier, and you could make really good photoreal hard surfaces. And you could tell that the aesthetic was meant to be that for Tim Burton, and Tim Burton, of course, we all know what he's done for stop motion and with collaborating with a lot of the people you see here. So, but that was a moment where they decided to not do it, and I was afraid that was the end of it. So why don't you, can you fill that in?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, for us working on it, we made 70 puppets. We made 70 Martians. We sent them out to
Beautiful, too.
Beautiful,
Gorgeous.
yeah. And actually, that's probably why Mars Attacks still stands up, because all of those puppet assets went to ILM. They had them as model scanning aids and as
It had the aesthetic, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, yeah, we thought our career was
over. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And
Because
yet,
stop motion dies about every
It died on Jurassic Park. It died here. It died on Mars
and
Attacks.
yet it doesn't.
But yet it doesn't. And then you get films like Coraline and all these, and Kubo and all these beautiful films that are coming out of, especially that one region up in Portland. It seems to be a real hotbed for artistry because you know when it's coming out of there that there's this level of, this was done on 2s and this is a style. There are a lot of films that are done on 1s that are beautiful, gorgeous in a different way. So there's all different flavors of it, but people I just love it. I love to look at it. I know we did it.
And you have done it on Elf.
On Elf,
Yeah.
we did it with the
Kyoto.
Kyoto brothers here in town. So, and it's funny because it's still, first of all, it felt old when it came out, which was great.
And it still feels old.
And it still feels old, and it's the part that holds up the best because stop motion will always look as good as this. It will never degrade. You look at CG, you look at other visual effects, and as the effects become more sophisticated, it starts to feel old, maybe charming, but I look at old CG from films I've worked on, and it's the hardest part to watch now.
Yeah, because the thing is, the same technology but polished and advanced, but not completely changed, is still in use. And the history of Portland is interesting, and Mark is part of that history. The anthropologist will track the origins of so much stop motion in Portland on Will Vinton Studios, which was doing claymation. Most of you...
And the California Raisins.
California Raisins
Right? Yeah.
and all that. And Mark was the auteur of the California Raisins. And he started with Will Vinton. And
It was a blessing and a curse.
and then Will Vinton Studios became Leica. And Leica is still producing those films. So it's coincidental, but that's the history.
Somebody had to explain to me all the different studios because I just think of it as one hotbed of, really, really high-end, beautiful
And good coffee.
stop motion. And good coffee. And good actors to do the stand-in work, too. That was good. So the first thing, my experience with it is Guillermo saying once when I was over at his place, I'm going to show you something, but this is very early days. And he was explaining to me and showed me some of the early scenes that were being done here, and it was mind-blowingly good. And it just looked just like it does when you watch the film, except you see the wabi-sabi of all of the things that have not yet been removed, because there's a lot of things are floating in the air, and they'll use little green rods to hold them up, and all that gets removed eventually. But some of it's actually, I like to watch the behind-the-scenes stuff because it makes you appreciate how it was done. So I thought that was gorgeous. And also the thought of how are you doing Pinocchio? Because Pinocchio, looking at it, there's a lot of different approaches you could take to the film. And there's the, of course, there's the old classic Walt Disney animation, but then there's also the source material, which is much darker and weirder.
Weird.
And I asked her, because in the anime, when you hear about what the old one was, when you hear about what the book was, and you only have as a reference point the film you grew up with, and you hear that, the cricket gets smashed with a hammer, and the kid is this rambunctious,
His legs get burned, he gets hanged.
all this crazy stuff. I'm like, how do you do that? It's going to be so dark. And he says, no, we're incorporating all of it into it. And Mark, I know that you have a background with Pinocchio as well. This is something that you were drawn to as well, or?
You touched on
No, I'm not going to tell that story. No, actually, I didn't have a background with him.
Did you feel a connection to it, or this is?
No. I hate it. No. It was something obviously I was aware of because it's it's a cultural sort of, it's a piece of the world, but it wasn't something I was drawn to.
So how did this collaboration happen?
I called him.
Yeah, I mean, Guillermo explained to me what he was intending to do with this story, and all of a sudden it was like, wow, okay. That's very different than my perception of Pinocchio, and also very interesting. Like so different that it made the story worth telling again, or it was a different story, or a different angle, I should say, on the same story. And it opened up, like the character of Geppetto becoming so much more important in the story. It's almost his story as opposed to Pinocchio's, and it's not about a little. A puppet learning to be good so that he can become real. It's about a father learning how to love so that he can become real in a way.
No, and the flip here also, which is that the, mortality isn't something that's given as a gift. It's the curse that Pinocchio has to
be immortal.
accept. He loses his immortality just so that he could be there.
But if I may, I wanted to work with Mark. I admired Mark. I did stop motion for many years. Before I did my first movie, I did makeup effects, digital, optical effects, and stop motion. And growing up as a young animator, I always admired Mark's work. And I followed Mark's work. So when I called him as a groupie, as a stan. And I was really, I loved Georgina's work. I knew it. I knew McKinnon and Saunders. So, all of my life, since I was a kid, I've been circling animation. And I've been able in the last 10 years through DreamWorks, Troll Hunters, everything that I've done, being able to come full circle to this. But this is a man I admired tremendously. So.
And how was that collaboration? How did it?
We never talked about I have a restraining order, but no, the funny thing is we never sat down and said this. We just mind melded really quickly.
Right.
And I know stop motion. He's a director. We have two sets of instincts, and we would always. If there was a disagreement or a difference of opinion, because we never had a real disagreement, we would always invoke story or character. And whoever made the most sense, that stayed.
And we had such a solid script, I have to say, that we didn't have to reinvent the movie partway through, which is something that happens all the time in films. So
especially animation.
Especially animation. So that we didn't have that much to disagree about. It was more, and I think we were completely on board with the notion of the tone of the film, and the style of the animation. I really loved that Guillermo had this background in animation. That I didn't have to explain anything to him. He knew there's a shortcut. You want to deal with people who. I don't have to explain all this. I can just go from here and go, what about this? And he gets it. And he understands the ramifications.
I just don't care.
That's right. I was going to get to that. Because stop motion is such a weird process. The rules, like the things that you can do, some things are really easy. Some things that seem like they should be incredibly easy are really hard, you know? And so there are ramifications for, hey, well, I'll use an example, let's just have him take his hat off. Well, his hat is built, you know, to
Different
accept
heads.
this head that doesn't, you know, it's like if he takes it off, there's going to be this like, big core thing exposed.
Yeah.
So there's all kinds of weird stuff like that you know, that we all know about.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and he still doesn't care though.
No, you know, what I do is the same with makeup effects. I know how they're done. I've done them. I made molds. I painted, blah, blah, blah. And when somebody says, it'll take a week, and I go, no, it won't. It'll be 3 days. And we will lose all this. I say, I know. And normally what I say is, you'll hate me now, but you'll love me in a couple of years. You know, because the result is the most important thing. And I really think everybody was committed to working really hard. The best example is the last day. We were doing the last revision on the last shot of the film. And I go, we got to do it again. And Mark said, there are no more animators. I said, there's you. And Mark animated the last film in the production.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, I hadn't animated in 20 years, so it was an incredibly fearful thing to get out there. And it gave me, it just reminded me how difficult animation is, and gave me renewed appreciation for what the animators do, because they're technicians. It's very complicated. These puppets are intricate things, and really being able to get the most out of them, you have to understand them on a deep, deep level. But they're not just technicians, they're also artists, they're performers. So they have to have both these things and be able to sort of bring them together. And that's kind of rare, you know, to find those people who can do that. And
the way we talked to animators also, we said, you will be credited and treated like actors. The main credits signal the animators before the voice cast. And we also asked from them, normally animation, commercial big animation is very oriented to sitcom or pantomime. Big gestures, you know, everybody's sassy and hip and one-liners fly everywhere. And families are dysfunctional but cute. And we wanted reality. So we did a lot of, you know, Miyazaki says something beautiful. If you animate the ordinary, it'll be extraordinary. So we did a lot of unnecessary gestures, you know. Normally, if you watch the movie, there are moments that feel like improv by an actor. It's not a gag. It's not going to end up with a laughter. But for example, Geppetto entering the empty carnival and stumbling upon a balloon and swatting it away and kicking it, it looks like an improv. But it is minutely planned to look like that. Unnecessary, 100% unnecessary. But necessary for you to feel it's a person. So little by little, he sits on the bench and he has to scooch a little. He doesn't need to scooch. And with a studio, they say, why are you scooching? That takes 3 days. And because it needs to feel real. It needs to feel like it's a person. So the difference, and we said it, anybody can move the puppet. Very few people can make it come alive. And I don't care, Mark and I said, no motion, emotion. You know, and this makes an enormous cumulative difference in this film and the way you perceive it. It ends up hitting you as human performers.
Yeah, when you see the puppets, I mean, a lot of it's going on in the eyes. Obviously, that's where you start. But we wanted the audience to look at those puppets and understand what they were feeling and thinking. And that's a magic trick. And it's an amazing magic trick that the best animators can do. But it's the most important thing, too, for the story. It's like the characters need to be feeling a certain thing at the moment that motivates their movement. They don't just move. Why are they moving?
There was so much emotion in the eyes, too. Sometimes watering up, sometimes the lower lid raising up. Could you two speak to how it's been designed to do such and how it was animated?
The eyes were the most challenging part on every one of these characters because you're dealing with a silicone skin, but then you needed to get blinks and eyeball rotation behind a sticky silicone skin. So we actually had to develop an eye socket that was, it encapsulated everything and protected the eyeball and the blinks from the silicone on the outside, and yet allowed us to glue the silicone, because the minute you pull the eyebrow paddle up, it pulls it away from the eye.
So you'd swap heads to get different eye shapes?
No. So we've literally got one silicone skin sitting over, and the eyes are set into the puppets, but they're in a removable, like self-contained unit.
I see.
So the key thing is that there's always one element of the unit that is holding the silicone in place around the eye shape, but then the eyeball and the blinks are sitting behind that and free floating inside that unit. So the animator literally animates the eyeballs and the blinks with a tiny pin, the sharpest needle we could find. It looks like a horror movie if you see them doing it. And sometimes they'll get their scalpels out, so it really looks like it. But basically it's about moving them with something incredibly sharp, and then you can get the smallest incremental movement.
And Brian, you come in from the front always, or sometimes, how would that work?
Always
from the front.
Always from the front. Yeah.
And some puppets, if you watch the movie again, Podesta, for example, as now and then, because of the structure, you can see the separations. But most of them are incredibly well.
We got this unique problem because we chose to have the spheres as eyes, and with the silicon faces, which I don't think we've done before.
We haven't done before.
Normally there would be with a sphere eye, there would be a printed face, so that would hold the shape around the eye. Or with a silicon face, there would be a hard eye with a floating pupil
that would sit on top of the silicone.
But because we went this way, we sort of created this
It's so tricky because you know, eyes, whether you're doing CGI or whether you're doing makeup or anything, the minute you mess up symmetry or you change the distance of one lid, the lid to the pupil,
you've lost
it could make somebody look deranged or somebody look, So to have that level of control, and if it was done, and often that'll be the digital layer. You'll get the last layer. I know we do a lot of animatronics, and you always have that safety net because it's relatively inexpensive and you can get in there afterwards. But to commit to what you have to do on the set and to get so much expression and not pantomime, to get it with subtlety and human behavior, to me, that's always the part. I don't think people fully appreciate this with all visual effects, is that you get wowed by all of the skies and the explosions and movements, but it's this triangle right here that everybody's an expert on. And even people I know that I've worked on Avatar, when I ask, what percentage of the time are you spending animating this compared to everything else? And they were like, this is like 75% of their time. For a movie like Avatar, it's still spent here because all of you are experts in it. And if something's a little bit off, that's when you get that uncanny valley. So all of this is about committing to a technique and an aesthetic and creating consistency.
For an emotional reason.
For human, to make it more human.
Yeah, I remember when we used to sculpt eyes for makeup effects, the worst mistake you could do is just sculpt the eye like a sphere. You needed to have the bump on the scleral and the bump, and they have pores. You had to sculpt pores
into the
surface
cornea,
of the eye and veins. If you just do a round thing, it's not as expressive. And in puppets, if you put the pupil on top of the ball, it's a completely different emotional. These puppets are emotional because of that.
And with the lids, we also the lids are cups that goes around the sphere as well, which gives us an endless incomings. Like you could decide exactly where you wanted to have it. Previously, we just had sort of fingernail clippings in different sizes that would fill up.
Stick.
Yeah, that would fill up the space there, but that meant that you didn't have that many options.
But if I may also, and this is something that makes a difference, this character, most of the animation in stop motion has veered towards printing faces. And let's say that 1,000 faces are printed. You still have an animator alone in the dark with a puppet, and instead of interacting with that face, they go into their exposure sheet and it says, now I'm going to change to face 255BA.
And this was started around the time of like Nightmare Before Christmas. Was that the first time?
It started, Nightmare, but they were sculpted by hand.
Yes, they
Nightmare.
were, yeah.
And then Coraline, I think.
Coraline was the
started.
first 3D printed.
The 3D printing.
Yeah.
But with seams. So they divided Opera and Nowhere.
So does everybody understand what we're talking about? So instead of in the old, all the way back, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, everything, you had a puppet, people would move things or put little sticky mouths on top. Everything was done, but everything was basically animated, or the shapes were done as you would with this. They began figuring out what the mouth shapes were, and like you saw in the pizza box.
And printing them.
They would have they'd print them out, and you'd look up what mouth shape you wanted, and then they would just swap the heads on top, and that would save them all the trouble, and you had much more freedom, so you get perfect phonemes. But as Guillermo's pointing out, they became literally interchangeable, and you lose some human emotion.
Mark and I talked early on, and we decided for this, because let's say that we give the animator 1,000 faces, this gives them 1,020, but 20 that they wouldn't have, and gives them control, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and also there's an aesthetic reason that we chose Pinocchio to be printed and the rest to be essentially mechanical. It's because he's the outlier.
Right.
He's the alien in this film. And he feels different, his animation feels different because of the process that we chose. And so it actually worked for us. He's alien in this world a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, the amount of control you can get with these faces, just because the mechanics have come, so far, it really gives the animator an infinite amount of choices. Yeah.
It's interesting though, isn't it? Because
Are we getting too technical, or are you guys okay? Are you okay? It's like Julia Childs talking about butter.
We're a bunch of nerds. I mean, that's what it comes down to.
we are.
For people that say that Hollywood is a land of depravity and adenoids or whatever the hell, here we are geeking out.
This is literally what we would be talking about in your house.
Yes.
We'd be going, I'd be going through his shoe boxes full of this stuff and asking all these questions. This is a treat for me, because I rarely get to have this type of conversation.
And the Kyotos, actually the Kyotos who animated your stuff in Elf, they, in the prehistory of time, they budgeted one version of this film to be shot in LA before Shadow Machine. And one of the things we got over and over and over and over again early on was, why don't you do it CG and make it look like stop motion? And the answer was very simple, because then it's not stop motion. And the intimacy of contact between the animator and the puppet. There's a technique in Japan called bonraku, in which the puppet is mounted on top of the puppeteer against a black backdrop, and it's so intimate that it reflects the animator, and only stop motion is that. Think about it. In CG, you have a mouse, a screen, and you never touch the puppet. In 2D, you draw the key poses, and somebody else draws the in-betweens. Here is all a person giving it. Animate is to give a soul, anima, and give a soul to something that didn't have it. And in stop motion, this is more true than in any other form of animation.
Yeah, not a lot of hands touch it. It's like you said, it's the work of one artist generally by the time. We've done all this stuff, we've built, we've designed and built and lit, and then it just, everything else goes away, and it's generally one person and a puppet or a set of puppets. And so the end product really reflects an artist's point of view.
Yeah.
And nobody else comes along and messes with it.
That's great. So one of the things, even though it's such a team sport, and this is probably one of the most collaborative genres of film that there is, just hearing you speak and just seeing those credits, it's amazing, though, how much it feels like the most personal, intimate film of yours, Guillermo. Because I saw it, it was like it reflected everything that, from Devil's Backbone to the attic with the lighting from Kronos to Nightmare Alley. Like, it felt like the greatest hits. It felt like this was a jewel box that was done like a little reliquary of all little aesthetic choices. Even the choice for the of being a Bible accurate angel with all the eyeballs on the wings and the multiple wings.
Seraphim, yeah.
A seraphim.
Yeah.
So it just felt like it was everything, and even seeing the behind the scenes stuff where even the stained glass has little images. If you look, the stained glass in the church has Pan's Labyrinth
And the bomb and the fun.
And the bomb from a.
But I think Mark and I agree that if it's the work of a director is to do self-portraiture, but make it so that everybody does that self-portraiture. Like everybody will tell you it's my movie. Everybody will say, oh, I did that movie. Everybody will own it. And I think that is a difference between a sort of overseeing every aspect. Like I have a hand in producing, a hand on writing, a hand on directing, but executing it, everybody becomes a self-portrait, you know? And I think it's something that you do very subtle, but very firmly, and ultimately, the only thing is you are the one with the hand on the red button. You can go, eh. But
I think artists just want to be heard.
Yeah.
And the nice thing about this process and about working with Guillermo, and particularly about working with myself, right? No, I'm kidding. Is that,
if I may say
if
so.
I may say so. No, is that you go and the artists understand that you understand their craft at some intimate level, so you appreciate it. Like we both appreciate every part of building this puppet and painting it, and we really try to express that to everybody on the crew, and not just in this sort of pandering, oh, great work. And it's like, we understand how hard it is, what each one of these people do.
Yeah.
And so when they hear that from us, they go, oh, I'm heard, I'm seen.
Yeah.
I want to do even better.
And we've done it. I mean, the thing is, I always say, if you want to learn to command, learn to follow. Mm-hmm. And I was years and years and years part of crews. And if you hear somebody in a turnover say how they notice what you did, a little thing, where you say, I love that little flick of the wrist that you did. Mm-hmm. I love that you delayed the gesture one more beat. You feel, I mean, the most beautiful gift you can give to a human being is to see that person. Mm-hmm. And if an artist feels seen, they're going to give you 100%. And ultimately, I say it goes back to two big blocks: visual design, which gives a world, and screenplay. I mean, those things, if those two things align, and we have years to align those things, years, then it feels cohesive of a piece. And I do think is impossible to deny that it belongs with Pan's Labyrinth and Devil's Backbone. It was created to belong there, but it's beautiful that it is a collective pyramid construction by everybody committing to that labor out of love.
Well, it's like you think of when you go to the old cathedrals and you see every little carving and every gargoyle.
Yeah.
That those were, one vision by one, hired by one, by the church to do it. But yet, you have thousands of little choices being made and details. And when you have something that's handmade, those details fall on individuals.
Yes.
And as somebody who's been an extra in movies, and like you see that one little part that you did, and you feel like you're part of it. And then the filmmakers make it consistent, but it's a mosaic of millions of individuals and choices that those individuals make.
One of the things I repeated until it was boring, I said, we are only as good as our worst shot. Not as good as our best shot.
The weak link.
And the weakest link is what we will be judged by. And everybody, I mean, Mark and I were very moved that every day, from the first day to the last day, animators brought things to the table that we were amazed by.
What was the daily process like? Did you have group reviews, or was COVID, did that interfere with?
That helped, in a way. That helped because the method by which we were able to converse, which ended up being Zoom, started with everybody, nobody was together. Animators were here, and Mark was there, and Brian was there.
And what cities were you in? This was an international production, right? You were at Guadalajara.
Guadalajara and Oregon, Portland.
Yeah, 90-some% of it was shot in Portland.
Yeah.
But yeah, Guadalajara, the Black Rabbit sequence, and the cricket dancing at the end.
Which is the longest shot.
Which is the longest shot. That was all done in Guadalajara. In fact, they built, I think, as you might mention, they built those Black Rabbit puppets.
Yeah.
And some character design in the UK as well? Was that what was going on?
Execution.
Execution,
Yeah,
okay.
I mean, the McKinnon Saunders made more than half of the puppets,
Yeah.
principal puppets, and that was in Manchester.
But they're geniuses, and they do change the design. But Toby Froud also changed the sculpture. I mean, we started, for example, the negotiation for the brows. We started with what we called the Kardashian brows. They were too big. So we went to the Jello brows, and then we ended up with this. You know, we did surgery in the brow until it looks natural, and it looks, you know, because to accommodate all the expression, you have to put silicone to contain the little palette that is going to move and all that. So it's a negotiation with the sculptors. And our sculptors were first rate, and McKinnon and Saunders is first rate.
And when were those armatures developed? Because when you explained it to me, I couldn't wrap my head around it, of the idea that the facial muscles were being displaced by little I guess, screws that adjusted.
Yeah, so it's ball and socket joints with a little metal paddle attached to the ball.
That we saw in
that you saw, yeah. And they're glued into the silicon skin, or even cast into the silicon skin. And then the animator is literally moving them, and they're rotating in the socket.
And when was this? I've never heard of this technology before. When was this originally developed?
Really, McKinnon and Saunders, I mean, it's been
Corpse
around.
Bride.
Yeah, so Corpse Bride was the first one that they used a lot of gears and clockwork in.
see.
But even back to Mars Attacks, we did similar things in Mars, because I was working at McKinnon's then, and it was foam latex back then. The head skins were all foam latex, but they had small paddles, eyebrow paddles, and, you know, little wires coming off the...
That's amazing.
Yeah, so...
I mean, everything you see has been wired or rigged to execute. Like when somebody turns and the coat floats, there's no air, there's no gravity, there's nothing. That coat has wires to simulate the air and the resistance. The thing with Mark says it very eloquently, because he says we cannot, like any other show, we cannot go and rent a chair and this and a piece of furniture from a rental house. We have to make it. We don't have grass. We have to make the grass. We have to make the leaves. We have to make the earth. We have to make the trees. Everything has to be
make
made.
it exactly as we need it to function. So we can't just make a book, because then like the book might need to open. Does the book have pages? Like, does the book need to have pages? So like, you know, quite often, because it's a big machinery and stuff, you walk into a set and like, and you go, oh, but he needed to open the book. Oh, but this book can't open. Oh no, the only book we have that can open is on another set, and it's mid-shot. Well, we got to
make a new book.
Yeah, we got to make a new book. Yeah. Or we got to wait until that book is done shooting, so we can have the book that can open. So it's sort of a big possible.
Everything is a giant three-dimensional chess game. In doing this, and all the sets have to come apart because the animators have to get in there. You know, if they're animating Geppetto over there, the distance between the arm socket and the fingers have to be accessible. So many times parts of the set is going to fly and shot in a separate path, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
I think of it as like we shot for almost 1,000 days, and it was like a war, 1,000-day war against gravity. Because that's the one thing that's constant. Gravity. That's why we engineer these things exactly the way we do, because everything wants to fall down.
Me included.
And you know, for every shot, we would have to adapt the puppet. So people are always asking me, how long did it take to make a puppet from start to finish? And I say, basically, you start on the first day of the build, and you end the last day of shoot. Because that puppet is being tweaked all the way through.
Like a race car.
But imagine this. Normally in a movie you have first unit, second unit, insert unit, splinter unit, a few, 2, 3, max. if you do. We were shooting with about more than 60 units at the same time. 60 units at the end.
And is it all in one big warehouse, or do you have a street?
Yeah.
What's amazing is when you go to a stop motion studio, it's like a regular movie studio, except it's all miniature. And you could walk, instead of going from building to building on a studio lot, you walk past all these duvetine curtains, because
There's
everything
tiny
has to be-
executives.
And the one thing you don't do in the stop motion is you don't order Indian food. Because then the studio becomes super small. You go, what happened there?
So sadly, we are
On that note,
On that note,
almost out of time. Well, but before we break this up, I'd just love to give an opportunity for all of you to say some final words, or if there's something we didn't touch upon.
Brian has a video that he wants to show you.
I actually do.
No!
No. I don't know. I don't want
Should we start on this end? You want to start?
Well, I mean, I would say the joy from my standpoint and my team's standpoint is that we got the chance to work on a stop motion puppet animated version of Pinocchio. So we were making puppets of a puppet. And it was a really special, it was a treat to do and to bring those characters to life and to work with this amazing team. I mean, I couldn't have imagined anything better.
I come up with something good now. So we've been talking a lot about how difficult it is and how much work it goes into it. But I think that's exactly why we do it.
Yeah.
Because I've been doing some computer animation where you literally just sit in front of the screen and stuff, and it just, to me, it becomes really boring, really quick. But this like ginormous collaboration with everything going wrong like every day, it's just a fantastic thing to work with and to do.
yeah. And I would say that nothing that we said up here today matters.
Yeah.
Weirdly. Like, it doesn't matter how complicated this was, how difficult it was. The
how
only thing
beautiful.
that matters is what you felt when you watched it. And I think the reason we were able to do something that I think is pretty special is, we had this man protecting us. Mm-hmm. Like, there were no notes. We made choices because we felt like they were the right choices for the characters and for the story. And for me, I'd never experienced anything quite like that. And I don't know if I ever will again, but it was
Because you started in commercials, that's the opposite.
Well, yeah,
right?
that's the opposite, yeah.
The opposite, they're telling you, you do your beautiful work, you get it done, and then somebody sees it who didn't look at the storyboards, and then you gotta rip it all down.
You're at the mercy of a 20-year-old copywriter who, has, he wants to go, no, or something stupid.
And so was this experience the pinnacle for you of
That's not
the
even
creative
what it
process?
was.
The beginning of a pinnacle, we hope.
It was, yes. This was the best experience of my work life.
That's
hands down. It was a joy. The way I really measure something like this is, I get up every morning. Do I want to go to work? Yes, I want to go to work.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the day, I want to go home. Though.
That's the perfect mix, right?
But the next day, I want to go back.
Yeah.
That's it.
I mean, I can't ask for better.
That's all you could ask for.
Yeah.
It really is.
Every morning and every night, when we opened the little files containing the load of the work of the day, it was like opening gifts at Christmas. And then talking to the team, and it is a testament, nobody wanted to leave. Nobody wanted to leave the project, unlike you, who want to leave right away. No, and the thing is, for us, and we talked about it on the beginning, I said, if we're going to do this, we have to push the medium to places it has not gone. Not necessarily technically only, but expressively go to places where stop motion has been limited or not probed by trying this, trying that, naturalistic acting. The camera staging is more live action. Mm-hmm. Normally, the staging is either too hectic, too hyper, or too sedate. And we wanted to stage with actors coming and going and the camera dancing with them, blah, blah, blah. But more than anything, we everybody in this project was an artist, and everybody in this project, it was an honor to work with them. Of course, for me to work with Mark, one of the great things that have occurred in my life, but to work with everyone and be inspired by them into understanding that animation has been kept in the children's table by economic decisions in a large industry that is incredibly reactionary and that keeps thinking this is a genre for kids and not a medium for art, and to push it into what it is and should be is the best, most malleable medium to execute most everything we want to express, and one of the purest forms of cinema. Animation is film, and we wanted to prove it over and over again by tackling not only the expressiveness of it, but the complexity of it. Because in this industry, most of the time, they're making movies for kids, ostensibly, and they're making movies for parents. They're making babysitter movies, where they can plop the creature for 2 hours and then come back and pick them up and not talk about anything. Because they had a dancing chicken skateboarding and escaping from a dragon or whatever the fuck that is. And I've done some of those. I've done, but and I say those need to exist. Of course they need to exist, and it's good, but can we have in the menu a few items that are different? Can every 5th, 6th, 7th, 10th movie be actually an art form that honors the art form? And I think that's what everybody committed to in this film. Everybody committed on this film, and everybody delivered, because we did what we needed to do when we were required to do it, and God damn it, here it is.
All right, let's hear it once again for Brian Leif Hansen, Georgina Hayns, Mark Gustafson, and Guillermo Del Toro, the movie Pinocchio.